want help on, which is, for the first time, advocating for yourself in a meaningful way. And I think the reason why is society really hasn't say the words, and you switch jobs 7 times in your career. That's 7 minutes to negotiate your entire life's earnings. Negotiation is like a kitchen remodel. It deserves at least one good counter. And so when they give you an offer, sometimes you can always take at least one shot, just to make sure that you fully advocated for yourself, fully check to see that.
I'm so excited today to have Aaron Thweatt here with us to talk about salary negotiation. Aaron, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Melissa. My name is Aaron Thweatt, and I'm an executive coach. And the main thing that I do is I help people manage difficult conversations and make tough decisions. And one of the key pillars of that is managing all conversations in your life and with yourself. And today, I think I'm most excited to talk about managing the conversation around salary negotiation. This is one of my favorite pastimes to help clients with and do speaking events on. The reason I got into coaching was because I started helping people negotiate their salary, like 5-6 years ago. I spent a lot of time in corporate America, 5 different careers across 18 years in various roles. Grew up in Alaska, went to school in Colorado, worked in Denver, then moved to LA for a very long time. Now I'm here in Austin, where I'm building my executive coaching practice and focusing on salary negotiation for women in their corporate and technological roles.
Excellent introduction. I'm so excited to talk with you today about salary negotiation. And I think I'll just kick it off with, from your perspective, why do people shy away from salary negotiations, and what can you offer them as advice on how to overcome or not be hesitant with salary negotiations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's kind of the first thing that I find people bring to me when we're discussing, their journey in salary negotiation, or maybe something that they have upcoming that they want help on, which is, for the first time, advocating for yourself in a meaningful way. And I think the reason why is society really hasn't made it conducive for people who want to advocate for themselves, but haven't traditionally done it. It hasn't made it easy. Hasn't shown them the path and the steps. And salary negotiation, such an integral part of, being a person in corporate America, tech, startups, and small business, but there is no class on it usually in college. And a lot of times people really aren't able to ask their parents. They may not have that skill set either. You just kind of get lucky, either being someone who just asks and can figure it out, or maybe has people around them that know. So that's kind of the first thing, is it's not obvious and apparent how to do it. Is step number one, issue number one. Problem number 2 is you do it so infrequently, right? If you say, it takes 1 minute to negotiate your salary, to actually say the words, and you switch jobs 7 times in your career, that's 7 minutes to negotiate your entire life's earnings. And so, it happens every 2 to 5 year intervals, maybe even longer for some individuals. And, it's a big moment that you don't really get to practice for, that there isn't a playbook for, and it's really high pressure and high stakes. And so combined with the, aforementioned lack of knowledge and lack of prep that most people don't get, they want to swing for the fences, and they don't have training, in essence, in a really high stakes situation. So sometimes they back off and don't try as hard to get as much money as they could, or phrase the exact incentives that they want access to. So that's one of the 2 biggest issues I see.
You make a really good point. I think back about my first job, or the jobs that came after my first job. I never even thought to negotiate. I was just so excited to get the job that I just accepted the pay that they were giving me. And I was lucky, like you mentioned, I had worked and babysat for somebody that was in the banking industry. So I got paid a higher rate just because the person I knew, not because I had any special expertise. It was one of my first jobs. So I was lucky enough to get that pay, but didn't know to negotiate, to your point, that I should even negotiate higher than I did. So thinking, and it's kind of spinning a little bit off that, when people are at the beginning stages of interviewing for a job, what are some key strategies that they can, or maybe precedents they can set at the beginning of that interview process when they're just starting to talk about salary and negotiating their salary. So what are some key strategies they can use in the early stages of interviewing?
Ready to lead smarter and invest wiser? On the Executive Connect podcast, we unpack executive strategies for wealth and influence. Hit the subscribe button now. Don't just watch, act.
Yeah. So 2 categories. There's the pre-work or preparation for the negotiation, and then the actual negotiation. The preparation looks like understanding your market value, making sure that you understand what the company's job really is and what the scope is, to make sure that that's correct and your understanding of it when you're looking at the job description, so you can have an opinion and a philosophy to have better discussion with the recruiter, the hiring manager, and the whole interview panel as you move through that process. That's kind of a quick primer on the preparation basics. And one of the key things is looking at with salary transparency laws, pay transparency is very helpful. So looking at similar job descriptions and job postings that have salary ranges in them is one of the best ways to get some data. Now, it's only salary usually. And so the incentive compensation, the equity is usually more in-depth exercise to acquire that information. But you have a really great starting basis of what your market value as a skill set is, and maybe in the employer's eyes. That's kind of a bottoms up approach. Top down is to consider what is the value of what I do for the company. Sometimes if someone's a HRBP or a software engineer at a large company, they could go and maybe run that function at a mid-sized company or a startup. So thinking about where your skill sets can have arbitrage across different stages of company, different industries, is another really interesting way to look at it. So that's kind of the quick primer on before the negotiation. Now, when does the negotiation start and when do you go in phase 2 is the next question. So the negotiation starts on the first phone call when the recruiter asks, what are your salary expectations? And this is a part where I think catches a lot of people off guard that they're asking that already sometimes. And I think, for your audience, they're pretty seasoned. And so they're familiar with that occurring. But a lot of conventional advice says to just state a range. And what I coach my clients to do is, you have all that preparation and that data informed about your skill set, but you want to see what they think. And it's too early, in my opinion, to be stating a salary range because you don't have leverage yet because you haven't interviewed. You don't know the full scope of the job and whether it's even leveled appropriately. You have to define the qualitative before you address the quantitative. And so starting to figure out what their pay philosophy is where I'd like to go with my clients. And that looks like saying to the recruiter, hey, I'm so glad we're talking about this. Can you tell me about your company's compensation philosophy for this role? Because they're asking you about salary, but what about bonus and equity that culminates in total compensation? So that's the ultimate number that you want to have clarity on when you're negotiating an offer at the end. And, you may take less salary and more equity if you can get with a really hot Series B startup. If you go work for Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, it's going to be more balanced towards, wanting a robust salary usually, because the equity maybe isn't as much philosophically as maybe a startup would give. And so understanding that ratio and that mix, depending on industry, stage of company, it's too soon to be saying what your salary should be because there usually isn't one fixed number that you would accept given your scope of opportunities.
That's a good point. I think sometimes you make a really good point. People jump the gun on that. Like the recruiter wants to know, if you're out of the pay range, right? If you want 150 and the job is 100, they want to get you out of the process, and telling them that your salary is 150 and they only have a budget of 100 would automatically knock you out of that job right away. So you make a really good point, making sure you understand before you move to the next level. So what do you think are some mistakes that people make in negotiating their salary?
Yeah, great question. So number one is not preparing adequately, and that kind of informs the whole process. But once you have that preparation done, as we mentioned, if you can make it past that first question, basically punting, by getting the information. Usually when you ask that question, what is your company's compensation philosophy? You'll find out one of two things. One is they'll state the range that they have, and maybe they'll mention the bonus target if there is one. And if there's equity, they may just say, and then equity is involved. They may not get super specific at that juncture. But it's good if they say that, because it sounds like, a company like that may have done its work to define what the job should be paid. Sometimes you'll find out that the company doesn't have a philosophy on what the job should be paid. And that's why they're asking you. So they want to see, who kind of fits their secret internal number that they haven't officially defined, or maybe they'll work it out throughout the interview process based on the caliber of candidates coming through. And so you want to leave that open and gather more information to understand the scope of the role is right. The next mistake is not understanding that the way you interview is also the way you negotiate. So basically, as you're interviewing, you're looking for what are the biggest pain points and how you can solve them uniquely. Obviously, that's how you get the job. But it's also, if it really comes down to it, sometimes if you really want to push it hard in a negotiation after you get the offer, reminding them of the key factors that you've identified in that business, that department, that org, that function that you'll be able to help them with, that will differentiate you as a candidate even more. So you're collecting that data along the way so that you can use that as part of your closing arguments. And I'd say third, the biggest one is not believing that you can't negotiate, to be honest. Every job offer negotiation is like a kitchen remodel. It deserves at least one good counter. And so when they give you an offer, sometimes the first offers are very good. And, if you've historically not negotiated, or you're currently unemployed, or you really don't want to work at your job anymore and you want out immediately, and a new great opportunity comes along, it's an opportunity for you to kind of let the pain of your current situation stop and go into something new and exciting. And the idea of challenging that by continuing the tension in between of the negotiation is scary sometimes to people. And that's usually why they work with me as a coach, or maybe another coach. But the idea there is you can always take at least one shot, just to make sure that you fully advocated for yourself, fully check to see that there isn't something still available. Because a lot of times when people don't negotiate, they kind of do it off an assumption. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to seem greedy. And, these are some of the three biggest common self-imposed obstacles they've seen clients say about their previous perceptions of negotiating. And it's worth taking a shot. Even if the company doesn't do anything else and you did ask, then you'd know you truly got the best deal possible.
So, no matter what the offer is, you suggest negotiating it. So even if it's, let's say you're making 100, the offer is 120, I think most people just take it, right? They're like, oh, I'm getting $20,000 more, I'll take it. So you're suggesting maybe negotiating like a sign-on bonus, or or maybe extra weeks vacation, or whatever, you come up with that you understand through the interview process. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. I'd say with a 99%, you should always try and negotiate. There are certain instances I'm sure that exist out there in the business world where they give a phenomenal offer. But the idea is that compensation starts as a science and ends as an art. When you think about how companies and HR departments determine what to pay people. And so art is subjective, and you want to make sure that you've at least had your voice heard and your input infused into that conversation, so that art is something that you like. What to negotiate is another great topic we should get into. You mentioned sign-on bonus. Normally the trifecta, that is kind of the holy grail, is more salary, higher equity if there is a company that does give equity, and a sign-on bonus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had some friends that are moving into roles that are startups, and they had significantly less equity than some of their other peers that negotiated. So it's spot on, right? I think if you don't negotiate, you can't get anything unless you ask, right? You got to ask, and all they can do is say no. And if they really want you, they're going to, maybe negotiate a little bit. But I would agree. I think there's always room for something, on the table. We talked a little bit about the job part of it. So you got the offer, you're happy with the offer, you've negotiated something. Now, pivoting a little bit, what about when you have the job and you've been there, a significantly long time? So the longer now you stay at companies, the people are coming in at higher base salaries. How do you negotiate in a position where you've either been at a company for a long time or you've been in the role? How do you do that negotiation? Maybe in a performance review or something. How do you negotiate once you're an employee, I guess is the question.
Are you someone with a demanding job, but tired of the 9-to-5 grind? What if you could build a profitable side hustle without sacrificing your full-time career? Our new partner, Book Profits, can show you how to turn your limited free time into a thriving online business. Learn how to find, sell, and profit from used books, all on your schedule from the comfort of your own home. Not crazy tech skills needed and no major upfront investment, just simple strategies that fit into your busy lifestyle. Visit the URL on the screen for a free training today and learn more.
Yeah. One of my other favorite topics. So not everyone who is looking for salary negotiation help is interviewing at another company or wants to leave. And you absolutely can negotiate while you're currently in a role. So, thinking about some of the principles we learned or we discussed in negotiating as a candidate, that first step is important. Understanding your market value, as far as what other roles in your industry and comparable size companies are paying. Where could you, with your skill set, go? It's a really important lens to take to understand your maximum market value from a skill set perspective. Then thinking about your own internal company. What is the unique value proposition that you feel you are providing to your manager, your team, the customer base, the client group? All of those things are really important. And this is like that qualitative buildup to combine with the quantitative research you do on your market value to then start defining your own philosophy about you want to raise, but how much, right? Saying you want to raise and not having an opinion on the number isn't as helpful as if you did have a direction where you wanted to go. Because if you leave it completely up to your manager and they are open to giving you a raise, it may not be as much as you want. And so if you really want to juice it, you should have an informed opinion about what that number is. So that's like step one. Now let's talk timing. You mentioned performance review. Let's start with that one, since that's probably the most low-hanging fruit as far as when a raise could be asked for. And typically performance reviews are done once a year. There are some companies that have, two calibrations a year. One is usually a non-compensation related calibration, halfway through the year. Doesn't mean comp adjustments do not happen, but maybe just not from the company's perspective are they intended to happen. But don't let an HR policy hold you back from asking is the point. Now let's say it is that final year review, the Super Bowl of a corporate America's employees' career cycle, where you actually get your raise. So if your company's fiscal year or performance review year is on the calendar year, then actually right now we're having this conversation mid-February of 2024. Most people are already having their performance discussions right now for 2023, or it might spill into March a bit, but the actual sit downs with your manager are probably happening right now. And the way I coach people to do this and prepare for this is ideally know that this date is coming. So probably let's say you've worked somewhere for 2 years, maybe 3, and you've never had a raise that was to your liking. You've never been promoted, or even if you have, maybe you're a rising star. This same advice applies. But start priming your manager on what your goals are, probably August, September, because the performance review that's happening right now, February, March, that should be the answer, not the question about should you get a raise. If you ask now, and I would support somebody in doing that, absolutely, you should always advocate for yourself. But the point is, if you waited thinking, oh, I can only ask during the sit down, that's a bit of an issue because your manager will say, oh, well, thank you for sharing. Didn't know you felt that way. Why don't we put together a plan for your performance in 2024 for a raise in 2025? And then you get punted a year. So to save yourself that time, you want to start priming your manager, probably about 4 months, 5 months before the actual sit down of the performance review. And that's assuming that, you don't actually have the opportunity to have regular discussions. Some people don't touch base with their manager that much. And when they do, those meetings go quick. Those one-on-ones, maybe they're biweekly, sometimes it's only every month. And they're quite a flurry of, the business's priorities, your team's priorities, what you're working on. And, sometimes people feel that if they were to bring up themselves in that meeting, again, we run into some of the same issues. They don't want to feel like they're rocking the boat, being greedy. But at some point, you will have to ask. You will have to state your case. And in order to get your manager thinking about it, when they have the most leverage for you, it has to be in the budget. And by the time you're sitting down February, March for your performance review, that budget usually is already pretty baked. The raises, the performance distribution curve has been set. The budget for that has been inputted by the manager, and they could maybe go back and ask. It's just going to be a lot more friction than if you started putting into their mind what your vision was for yourself, your career, and what your desired raised is. Then they would actually, if they were on board, start doing what they need to do to manage up from them, from their own perspective, in order to get the money to give to you at your performance review time.
Yeah, I know a lot of times friends that are in positions for a while, they've been getting 2-3% raises year over year, no matter if they achieve the highest top results. Everything's been tippity top. They've achieved everything they were supposed to, and they're getting 2%, 3% raises that aren't keeping up with inflation or, just where salaries are right now. What is your recommendation? Let's say they've been there for a while and they've gotten 2%, 1%. What would be your recommendation for these people to, they've gone to their manager, they've showed their value, and every year they're getting 2% a year. What would be your recommendation for these type of people to get more compensation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a trend that is probably going to accelerate just given the state of the economy, and companies watching headcount expenses and incremental cost creep, as far as salaries live forever. The 1 to 2 to 3%, if you're getting that, that's just we'll call it symbolic raise. That is something that the company is not prioritizing the base salary increase of the employees. They assume, I guess the assumption is that the company's compensation philosophy, ranges, and structures are pretty organized. If you're in an earlier stage company, younger company, or a company that has a very lean HR team, that may not actually be true. And that's the other reason why you should be, doing yearly research. Maybe take interviews from time to time, check your market value to ensure that you're moving along appropriately with where the market is based on your skill set. Again, compensation starts as a science and ends as an art. So internally, you may not have the right progression. And if you don't say anything and you're just allocated that 1, 2, or 3%, the company assumes you're happy. And this isn't about the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. It's about the person who is able to advocate for themselves, communicate their value and alignment with the company's objectives or the team's objectives, and show how their outcomes are really delivering for the company on what it wants, or maybe even more, or maybe the scope has increased. You have to talk about these things. So many of my clients have started roles, and then 6 months in, they suddenly got a lot more. Even like 2 weeks, I had a client, her manager who hired her quit, and then now she had to do her job. And so when things like that happen, when there's material changes, there's opportunities to ask for more. But if you don't say anything and just let it go by for years and years and years, you'll get just the basic amounts. So you got to ask. Second is having communication with your manager about what your goals and objectives are in virtually real time. We all know that corporate goals can get set very late in the process. And even if your company is on top of it and is able to set what your individual goals are for a year, actually earlier in the year, things change. And being able to have a discussion with your manager about how you're trending is important, because sometimes people think, I think I'm doing pretty good. And then sit down with their manager and like, well, you're standard performance. It's like, really? Why? You didn't tell me. And so, being able to shake the bushes a bit, have a good dialogue and good relationship with your manager so that you can ask them probably, I don't know, once every 2 months, something like that. Just want to check in and see, how you think I'm doing, and maybe have a dialogue about that. And then if you really want to push it and say, is there any reason that if my performance continues the way it is or has been, that you would not give me the highest possible raise at our performance review?
Ooh, I love that. That was great. Because you're asking for it. You're not waiting. You're asking for it now, today. You're putting it in their mind today.
Correct. Because what you don't want is we never talk about it. The entire year goes by. You get to the performance review and they're like, well, you could have done this a little better. We like this. And so, let's put that plan together again for next year. And you get punted a whole year. And depending on the cycle, it could be up to 14 months before you actually get a new raise, right? So it's just about avoiding that. It's about removing plausible deniability from your manager so that they have to tell you the truth at some point about your performance, or they just may have to, in a managerial speak, you'll have to read into it, but the company may not have the money for it, right? And then you go, maybe I've done all I can here. Maybe it is time to start looking for a new job if money is the biggest motivator for you. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors. I'm not saying you should just blindly quit your job if you're not getting the raise you want. But you should at least flesh it out so that you understand that if you stay and keep performing that way and the economic situation doesn't change, you may not get much more of a raise.
Yeah, well said. I think there's two pieces I think of. There's people that get a job, stay with the job, move up, go for more pay over a period of time. And then I think there's the other side where I know a lot of peers have gone from one company to the next company, and what they're chasing is dollars, right? So they're chasing dollars through the process. What I'm finding with the second people, as they've kind of rode this wave with the big salaries, right, in the last few years, and now there's been, a let go or a downsize or a shift, and so they've kind of jumped their way up, double the salary, and now they're having to go back and relook at what their value is. And I love you mentioned like knowing what your value and what your worth is. How would you suggest somebody do that? Like in that either case where somebody's been at a company for a while, they've stayed, and 3% over 5 years is nothing compared to going from one job to the next job where you're talking $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 pay increases.
Right. It's a great question. And, it's understanding the dynamics of the environment. So now we're probably more in a downtrend than we are an uptrend. Even though maybe sometimes it feels like it's a cliff based on all the layoffs that we're seeing. The first thing you do is, as we've been saying, is you got to have a good informed lens on what your value is in the market. Looking at those job descriptions. And even if you don't live in a state with that pay transparency, looking at that same company, or, they have that role maybe in multiple cities, being able to infer at least what it could pay if you do some geo calculations, maybe up or down from whatever that posting is a great start. Tapping your network if you do have people in the same industry, getting their lens on, what they see people making, especially if they have, maybe they're in a management role where they are making those decisions rather than just as an individual contributor and it's what they make. But every piece of data is helpful. So once you get that data, then you have to make sure, like, are your skill sets top notch? Because ultimately it's about, having that skill set that is enough to differentiate you from all of the candidates, because that's how you have leverage. Even in a downward economy or a downward job market, the companies are still hiring people that they really need, right? It's just the largesse and the froth has definitely been taken out And so they're looking to be much more efficient with their dollars, more scrutinizing during the offer process to ensure that they're getting the highest caliber of candidates. And so the same way that you interview for the role, it's just a higher hurdle rate. But then if you get in, you have leverage, because if you get a job in this economy, you're a standout.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I know in the past, I used to use websites like careerbuilder.com to see the pay ranges like in a city. Is Career Builder, is that still a thing? Is it still accurate information? Because I know some friends on Career Builder, their salary is substantially less on Career Builder than what they're making. And then kind of some states it's higher than what others are making. So is that like a good place to look?
I have two opinions about that. As a former compensation consultant, inside 4 different tech companies, when employees would bring that type of data to us from Glassdoor, salary.com, it was never super compelling. Obviously, we heard what the employee was ultimately trying to tell us, but from a pure data standpoint, that data it's kind of dirty. It's self-reported. It's not super clean. And it's just salary, right? Where are the incentives? The whole thing is missing. But the other opinion that I have to share is, you as a candidate or someone working a job wanting more data, what are you supposed to do, right? You do need something. So I would definitely look at that. If you work in a technological role, levels.fyi is pretty robust as far as how they break out distinct skill sets, what they pay by level. These sort of, the rebels are creating their own data sets, and they're getting more and more robust in nature, not quite rivaling, the Mercer and Radford surveys that, internal HR departments do across, thousands and thousands of companies, but it's getting really good. So looking maybe for an industry specific data set. I know even in aviation, there's, reported data from a survey in one of the main magazines or publications. So across that, there's maybe a unique well of information for you to start with, rather than one of the broader ones like a Glassdoor or salary.com.
That's great, Aaron. Thanks for sharing that. I've never even heard of it. I plan to go look at it. It's great piece of information.
Yeah. And of course, starting just on the salary, at least, job descriptions. That's one of my favorites, where there's states that require pay transparency. It's California, New York, Colorado, things like that.
That's great. Want to be mindful of time. I want a couple closing questions for you. Any final thoughts or top tips you can share with our listeners? Maybe top 3 tips about negotiating their salary that you can share in closing?
Sure. Understanding where you are in time is really important, whether as a candidate or you're staying at a company. Just because, what's the budget process, understanding how far away from where the company normally makes that decision is important, again, so you can help prime your manager and make things frictionless for your ask, rather than, waiting for the raise. It comes, you're unhappy with it, and then going back to the well. Definitely I would always advocate someone try, right? It's just about, maybe whenever you see this, we don't know, but you should definitely try. The second thing is, advice wise, definitely, there's so many things. Understand the performance requirements and the performance criteria, like from an HR perspective, what is the actual scale, and start to have that baked in to your conversations with your manager while you're talking about what you're going to be accomplishing, when it should be done by. And if you're able to do those things, asking them, you can never get a full confirmation, but say, would this give me the best chance at getting the highest possible raise, or highest possible bonus, or highest possible annual equity grant? Because it's, if you're in tech, those 3 levels are possible usually. And you want to ask about all of it. It's not always just about the salary. And sometimes they're like, companies will be watching cash a lot. Maybe they would be more open, especially since they've laid people off. They have some free, stock, and they have treasury stock. So dilutions may not be as much of a concern, and the stock prices have gone up. S&P is an all-time high this week. So, dilution is maybe less of an argument at this current juncture. It could change in several months. But that's one tip I would give there.
I love it. Negotiate, 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 and ask for it.
Yeah.
Ask.
But as a campaign, and the campaign is ensuring that your manager and you are on the same page about how your performance is being viewed is probably the thing that's consistent, with spikes occasionally of actually asking rather than saying nothing, having zero clarity about how you're doing, and trying to climb the entire mountain in one or two conversations is what I'm trying to prevent for people.
I love it. Aaron, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. Before we close, tell us a little bit about you, your book, how we can connect with you for the listeners.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Aaron Thweatt. It's Thweatt in my last name. So Aaron Thweatt, Aaron with two A's, is my Instagram handle at Aaron Thweatt. My website is resparkcoaching.com. There you can find out more about me, sign up for my newsletter, get in touch with me if you want to chat about any negotiations you have coming up. And also go in at the top of the page and click book and sign up for my book that is coming. I think actually just got delivered by UPS while we were here. But I wrote a book with Chris Voss, and he's a former FBI hostage negotiator who wrote this book, Never Split the Difference. So, I co-authored a book with him on using empathy in business. And the ultimate foundation of how I coach in my executive coaching practice, whether it be salary negotiation or personal issues, is helping you manage the conversation in your life and career.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for being here today. And that's all for us at Executive Connect.
Thank you so much.